Hello and welcome to this review of my NMB RT-101 Plus. It's a Space Invaders keyboard that kind of fills a gap that's been in my reviews so far. See, previously I reviewed a Hi-Tek 725, an XT keyboard, which is the earliest model of Space Invaders keyboards, with the first type of switch they made, namely the linear ones. And then afterwards I showed an 8255, which is one of the later models they made, with the last type of switch they developed, the clicky ones. So now I present you a medium old model with the switch that came before clicky and after linear, the tactile switches. These switches are usually light brown or grey, in this case they're light brown, and they use the old switch housing, just like the linear switches, compared to the clicky switches which used a more modern redesigned version. And they use the same contact mechanism, which consists of two contact hands separated by a bar in the slider, which is moved out of the way when you press a key, like this, see? Now the linear switches are pretty much just that, and the clicky ones use the same contacts, but with a follower arm to generate a very subtle tactility and soft clicky noise. But these tactile ones have a quite different way of generating tactility, and they're also not as highly rated as the other two. The linears are a very respected, exceptionally stable switch, and the clicky ones are known for their pleasant, soft clicky sound and nice key feel. But the tactile ones are usually regarded as the worst of the bunch, getting much more mixed reviews. Some like them, and some don't like them at all. See, this is what the contact arms look like on linear and clicky switches. And instead of using a follower arm to generate the tactility, what they did was simply bend the contact leaves so that it had a little notch that you have to push the slider through to generate the tactility. This system is somewhat reminiscent of how Cherry did it, except they use a straight contact leaf and then a little notch in the slider to generate the tactility. So they did it the other way around, essentially. But the problem of both of these systems is that this sort of mechanism generates tactility in a really rudimentary way, so the key feel you end up with is very unclean. Incidentally, the key feel is actually somewhat similar to Cherry MX Brown, except a bit stiffer and more tactile. Additionally, at first the key feel was really horrible because I was typing on them way too hard. The problem is when you bottom out on these, the slider gets kind of stuck between the contact hands, so the last bit of the downstroke feels really scratchy. But after using this for a week, as I usually do, I learned to type on it much more softly. And although I'm still not super enthusiastic about these switches, they've grown a bit on me over time. As with most Space Invaders boards, the spacebar has a stiffer switch, in this case a yellow one, and it's linear, not tactile. I haven't taken the weighting of this one, but the one in my clicky NMB was 140 grams, which is ridiculous. So my advice is to switch the spring inside the spacebar switch with that of a useless key like the pause key, so you can have a normal switch weight there. Most Space Invaders switches are pretty stiff anyway. I traded for this keyboard, and I've been looking for one of these for a while because they're pretty interesting and quite good looking in my opinion. See, NMB released many models of RT-101, but this is the very first type, and the first one with a modern 101 key layout as far as I know. It was around at the same time as, and quite obviously based on, the famous IBM Model M, which dominated the market. Here's an issue of PC Mag from February of 1992, which you can find on Google Documents, and in this bit they compare some of the most prominent keyboards of the time. This particular RT-101 is from 1988, so it's probably the model that came just after, but that doesn't really matter in this case. Here's the Model M. It cost $217 at the time, which equates to about $370 in 2016, which is a pretty unthinkable amount of money for a keyboard now. And here it shows some Cherry G80s, which cost a bit over $100, and the cheap option, the Chicone KB5181, which costs just $50, but which is also built about as well as a cardboard shithouse. But a bit further down it shows the NMB, which only cost about $37, which is now about $60. Ironically, that's more or less what you'd expect to pay for it now, actually. But despite the low cost, don't think that this thing was built like shit just like the Chicone, because in fact the build quality is really good. The case is obviously inspired by the Model M. It's nearly the same size and has that characteristic wedge shape. And the switches are mounted in a thick metal mounting plate over a PCB, all of which is screwed securely into the case. It's got a pretty thick and fairly long coiled cable, and there are 2 cable gutters for it at the back, which work quite well. There are 2 flip-out feet on the back, and they're kind of elegant because if you fold them in, they sit level with the back of the case. It even has N-key rollover. Quite impressive really. Most of the keyboards on that list, including the Model M, don't have that. One of the best things about these old NMBs though, which they continued right up until the end as far as I'm aware, is the keycaps. They're thick PBT, nice, with bold, high quality dye sublimed lettering, which stand the test of time remarkably well. On the numpad, they're double die sub-even with brown sub-legends, just like old IBM Model Ms. And frankly, I'd say the caps on this are just as good as those on the Model M. Even the spacebar is made out of PBT, which isn't easy to do because PBT shrinks more than ABS does, so most manufacturers, even nowadays, don't bother. All of which together make this keyboard a remarkable buy, considering it's only around 1/6 of the cost of a Model M. Also, the keycaps on this particular model also have a unique trait you might have noticed already. See, many keyboards, even to this day, use notches, most often on the caps lock key, to prevent you from accidentally hitting it when you're pressing the A key. And some old ISO boards have it on the return key too. But this one has notches on lots of keys, and bizarrely enough, they're on the outside rather than the inside. And I'm really not sure that was a particularly useful idea, and in fact it disappeared off their boards really quickly, but it does give it an instantly recognizable look, and actually I really like it. I think it looks cool. As usual, they stabilize the right shift quite poorly. It doesn't work if you hit it all the way at the edge because the stabilizer doesn't reach, so you have to hit it a little bit further down. And also the layout is kind of annoying because it uses a tiny backspace key like the vast majority of Space Invaders boards. Finding one with an ANSI or ISO layout can take a little bit of time. Now, even though this model is 80 XT switchable, this particular one only works in XT mode. If you set it to 80, it doesn't work properly at all. Not even the lock lights come on. So I think one or more of the capacitors need replacing. And a bunch of switches needed some coaxing back to life at first because they didn't register properly. But now they all work. I've got another Tactile Space Invaders board that had the same problem, by the way. So it might be a common issue for these switches. Overall, the keyboard is a bit of a mixed bag. If you like Cherry MX Brown, you might very well love the switches. If not, you might want to let these Tactile Space Invaders pass by. The board itself and the keycaps are quite awesome though. Excellent build quality, N-key rollover, and the layout is quite modern except for the tiny backspace key too. If you like the board but not the switches, you can always look for one with linears or clickies though. Personally, I enjoy it mostly for its looks rather than its typing feel, but to be honest, that's good enough for me. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.